Hi gamers, just a quick video here. Through almost 1 year of Honkai style content, we have gotten so many characters with each of them have their own gimmicks / mechanics. So for this video, I'm trying to list all of those current mechanics that the game has for their characters, along with the possible variation of these mechanics for future characters, since at some point we are going to run out of unique mechanics when more characters are being released. Some of these mechanics overlap with each other, but it really differs on how it is being triggered. For example, both Clara and March 7 has a counter mechanics. While Clara will counter every time she gets hit, or with ultimate, she will counter when anyone gets hit, while March 7th will counter anytime someone with a shield is being hit. So their mechanics revolves around counter, but the way it is triggered is different. But as a heads up, do note that the basic turn-based mechanics like buff removal, damage penetration, healing over time will not be discussed here, since those are standard turn-based mechanics in many different games that needs to be added. Additionally, core mechanics like additional damage against burn enemy, more damage after using ult, will not be considered since those are mostly damage increase and not modifying the current gameplay mechanics. And the main reason why I'm making this video because I hope people will understand the importance of having a mechanic that is unique on a gacha characters, and it is more than just character design in order to keep players hooked with the combat in a turn-based game. Since many gacha games will end up overlapping their characters so much, and at that point, power creep becomes so obvious. And so far, in my opinion, Honkai style has been doing a great job in making all of its characters have a unique mechanics regardless of their power level or the current situation with the power creep in-game. So let's begin. The first mechanics that I want to mention is the 2 layers of ultimate. Through Argenti, we know that it is possible for characters to have different levels of ultimate. With Argenti, obviously his level is very good against normal mobs, while his second level will make him somewhat viable to deal a single target damage, but it really shines during pure fiction mode. From this, we can expect to see more characters from any paths to have different levels of ultimate in the future. Because as I've mentioned before, it is possible for characters to have an overlap mechanics. And the second mechanics is guaranteed Taun. Thanks to Trailblazer, we get to have a guaranteed Taun mechanics as a form of debuff. This is very essential for those who doesn't want to get hit like Arlan and Yanqing. But currently, only Trailblazer has this ability to cause a guaranteed Taun. As I mentioned, for now we have Taun as a debuff. There's more you can do to produce a variation of this Taun. Like instead of taunting on the caster, it could be redirected to another character instead, especially for those who likes to get hit like Clara or Blade. Or another variation could be, instead of having as a debuff, they could make the taunt to be as form of buff instead. And the next mechanics will be increases aggro to a specific path. Thanks to Lynx, now we know that it is possible to increase aggro on specific path, as she's able to do that for destruction and preservation unit. It is not as powerful as guaranteed Taun, but having a healer doing this, you can save your party slot from putting a shielder in the team, assuming that you have destruction unit in your team, and destruction unit tends to be a bit tankier than the other DPS units. Also, these mechanics can still have variations as well, like instead of increasing aggro, it will be used to decrease aggro for specific path. Like for instance, the Hunt, Yanqing will really benefit from this kind of buff, since his main gimmick is all about not getting hit. And the next mechanics is counter. We have briefly discussed it. Thanks to Clara and March, we have a counter mechanics. As I have explained in the intro, there are different ways for the counter to trigger. This can still be improved as well. Like for instance, combining with Taun, you will only be able to counter at the taunted enemies, or a counter that can work on dots as well, or a counter that accumulates damage on the caster and then will release everything at once as a really big damage on all enemies, or something like that. Are you hearing this, HoYoverse developers? I'm giving you free ideas here, so you better use it well. And the next mechanics will be dot triggers before the enemy's turn. At first, this mechanics was introduced through Sampo's Eidolon, but only on Windshear Dot. Thanks to Kafka, you can trigger all types and makes the dot team to be so much better. Since previously, dot was a bit too slow to play and relying on enemies' turn to deal tons of damage. At the current state of the game, nobody but Kafka is able to trigger all types. You might get a few less powerful variation in the future, like it only triggers on 2 different dots instead. Since for single element, we already get all of the needed characters for them, except for one, the shock dot. Sampo is able to trigger wind shear, Guinaifen is able to trigger burn, and Luca is able to trigger bleeds. So the next one probably will be a 4-star lightning dot units. We shall wait and see for that. And speaking of dot, the next mechanics is a new type of dot. Black Swan introduced a very interesting gameplay mechanic, where Arcana counts as wind shear dots, but has different stack than the normal wind shear. This only means that there might be more non-standard dot types in the future, like a different types of shock, burn, and bleed. So with this, at least there's still more 3 unique characters that Hoyoverse can release to fulfill this. And the next mechanics is, from the newly released Sparkle, breaking through 5 skill points. With Sparkle Talon, it allows us to break the 5 skill point limits up to 7 points. And this really opens up for more variation for characters that consumes multiple skill points. So when it comes to skill point limits variation, most likely it will be different skill point ceiling, like maybe 6 points or 8 instead of 7. And instead of Talon, it can be increased through skill or ultimate. So basically like a 4-star version of Sparkle. The next mechanics will be ignoring element to toughness shred. Shuei enables toughness shredding, ignoring their element affinities. This is a very powerful ability to have. But when it comes to further variation of this mechanic, it is a bit difficult for me to think for one. The one I can all think of may be applying buff on allies or debuff on enemies, so that they're able to shred their toughness bar regardless of element affinities, instead of relying on one character main gimmicks like Shuei's. And with that, everyone can do toughness shredding instead of just Shuei. Speaking of toughness break, the next mechanics is weakness break efficiency. Ranmei enables one of the best buff in the game of breaking enemies' toughness bar, which previously only available through blessing in the simulated universe. So in terms of variation, other than different numbers of efficiency breaks, perhaps it could be made into a debuff on the enemy instead, which is less reliable but still useful regardless, since with buffs, everyone is benefited from it, while debuffs, it can be resisted, and if a new enemy wave comes, they won't get the debuff. So maybe it's like a 4-star version of Ranmei. And still speaking about Ranmei, the next mechanics is additional break. Ranmei is so crazy by enabling 2 unique mechanics with just one character. Not only she is able to increase his weakness break efficiency, which is once again, it is such a bonker thing. Extending their weakness break state is so good for Dot's team, as it's still considered as the enemy taking their turn. But when it comes to variation, I'm not sure how it could be done. Any ideas, guys? The only thing I can think of, instead of extending the break state, the moment they recover from their break state, they will receive the break damage that was inflicted on them previously. I don't know, it's just a random idea that I came up with. And I don't know if that can count as a variation for this mechanic. Before we are moving to the next mechanic, if you appreciate on what you have heard so far, do leave a like and subscribe to my channel. Not only you will be updated every time I make a new content, especially Honkai style content, but also your help will make my life turn in a much better direction. And in turn, it will allow me to provide even more content for you guys. And if you decided to press the subscribe button, I thank you all from the bottom of my heart. Anyway, sorry for yapping, let's continue. The next mechanics is a buff field. Locha not really opens up many ways you can heal, but also the idea of a field that has effect every time something is happening. With Locha's field, every time a character does an offensive move, they will be healed, along with the rest of the teammates. And we already have another example of such field, which is Ranmei's field. It has an effect that not only buffs our allies, but also inflicting break extension on enemy, at least once per field. A variation of field that I can think of, maybe it is like a dot field that will make enemy take damage, or like a true damage every time they take actions. Or maybe they will obtain a random stats debuff every time they take actions. Or maybe even a shield field that grants you shield after attacking or being attacked. And I think there's still a lot of application that you can do when it comes to these field mechanics. And the next mechanics is gacha. Well, having gacha combat mechanics in gacha game is always fun. Thanks to Qingque, their system that changes your attack depending whether you can collect certain things that was distributed through RNG. Well, I think when it comes to variation, there are tons of mechanics you can do with it, like spinning a roulette every turn, or flip a coin, or throw a dice. And we might get another gacha mechanic soon. According to rumor, Adventuring might be the next character that has RNG as part of their mechanic. So if that's true, I wonder how fun it is going to be when you start using Adventuring. Or is it going to be frustrating instead? We shall have to wait and see. And next is stacking skill point consumption. This mechanic is unique to Misha at the moment, at which he will remember how many skill points has been consumed all this time before he launches his ultimate. Pretty neat mechanic, I would say. A variation that I can think of, maybe instead of how many skill point has been used, it will be the opposite, how many skill points has been recovered. And still with the skill point mechanic, the next mechanic is multiple skill point consumption. Through Danheng Inhibitor Lune, now we know that it is possible to have a skill with multiple consumption of skill points. Perhaps in the future there's going to be a character, regardless of their paths, that can consume even more skill points than Inhibitor Lune. Like consuming all skill points to deal a massive amount of damage, for example. And the next mechanics is Followup Attacks after reaching a condition. Followup Attack has been present in the game since launch, and there's so many characters that are able to perform them. Like Herda after enemy reaching below 50% HP, or Himiko after breaking enemy's toughness bar, Blade after losing HP 5 times, and many more. So when it comes to future variation, there are still a lot they could do. Like for instance, like after enemy receive dot damage a few times, or after healing being done a certain amount of time, and many more applications. And the next mechanics is a summon or an extra unit. Through Jing Yuan and Topaz, we know that it is possible for characters that works alongside them. With a variation, perhaps in the future we will be able to see more than one summons at a time, or maybe even a summon that doesn't do damage and instead they will do buff, debuff, heal, or shield. At the very least, there's still a lot they can do with the summoning mechanics. They might even get at least another 10 characters revolving around these mechanics. The next mechanic will be weakness application. Through Silver Wolf, now we know that it is possible for a character to apply weakness that is not there originally. And through this, perhaps in the future, there are going to be some characters that are capable of applying weaknesses in a specific element only. If Silver Wolf is able to apply element weakness to one of the elements that we have in the current party, in the future, there's going to be a character that is able to apply just one element weakness, regardless of any other element that is present in your party. And this can be really good for a mono element team, I suppose. And with this alone, we can have about 70 characters revolving around this mechanic already. The next mechanic will be basic attack or skill modifier in a power-up state. Through Blade, Preservation Trailblazer, Luca, and Jingliu, we know that characters are capable of modifying their basic attacks or skill that makes them reach their highest potential, while otherwise they might end up contributing with minimum result. When it comes to a variation, maybe there's going to be an ultimate modifier when a certain condition is met, or there's going to be a non-DPS power-up state instead. Like normally, they will only heal one character, but in power-up state, they might end up healing all of the characters, maybe along with debuff cleanse, or something like that. So there's still a lot of characters that they can make out of this mechanic. We only have a few left. The next mechanic will be HP state. This is a mechanic that has existed in many turn-based RPGs. The higher or lower your HP, the stronger you are. In Honkai Star Rail currently, only Ireland that has this mechanics, at which the lower his HP, the higher his damage will be. I want to discuss how ineffective this mechanic is in Honkai Star Rail since we need to discuss about Ireland in depth, and I have talked about it a little in my character retrospective video, so do check that out. A variation of this mechanic will be obviously when someone at max HP, they will be at their strongest. And for lower HP, obviously make it applicable on other path since this kind of condition is better for the hand unit because they have lower aggro point. And other than that, you could have someone with lower their HP is, the higher their defense would be, along having a guts or an auto revive. So it could become another form of preservation unit that doesn't rely on shields, much like Fushuan. And those who likes to play it risky will really enjoy this kind of unit. Still talking about HP, the next mechanic is HP as a resource. This is a mechanic that is unique to Blade at the moment. His playstyle honestly is one of the most interesting one since we are pretty much managing his HP to keep him in the buff state and also a fuel to make sure his ultimate is dealing the maximum damage. And this HP resource also synergizes well with his Talon to perform Followup Attacks and heal himself, which is why he's a 5-star character. I would say Blade is one of the most well-designed and interesting character in the current state of the game when it comes to mechanic, which is why I still use him a lot. In terms of variation, there's so many ways to use HP as a resource, like converting HP into shields and deals a little bit of damage to the enemies at the same time, like how the Destruction Resonance in Simulated Universe. But the best variation would be converting HP to energy, maybe to oneself or the other units. That way there's some big risk associated with getting energy, but the payoffs has to be quite significant in order to compensate for the high risk of converting HP into energy, which is unlike Tingyun that relies on ultimate only. But I can see this mechanics to be extremely broken since you can just have a lot of abundance unit in your team. And the last mechanic for this video is getting extra turn after a kill. This mechanic was introduced with Zilla, which also with Dan Heng, albeit it's limited in its usage. Currently, a variation already exists with Su Shang that immediately takes action after using ultimate, or Jing Liu when she entered her power-up state. Other than that, when it comes to a variation, maybe it can be used on a healer or a support when there are multiple allies low in HP, and they could move immediately once every few turns or something. So they act like an emergency doctor. Well, I was hoping for this to be a short video, but there was a lot of combat mechanics that they have had in Honkai Star Rail. I might still miss a couple mechanics here and there, so do leave it in the comment section if you notice any mechanics that I didn't mention, and I will cover about it next time, perhaps by the end of major version 2 update, or when 3.0 update comes next year. Other than that, also tell me if you have any ideas on how any of these mechanics could be expanded into the future, just like how I have provided all of these variations throughout the discussion. Since with turn-based as a core gameplay, eventually we might end up getting a carbon copy character in the future, with the ever-increasing roster. And once again, so far the developers have done a stellar job in making all of the characters played differently, maybe except a very few of them. Anyway, I thank you all for watching. Would like for those who are still pulling for Sparkle, and if this discussion has been educational for you, please do leave a like and subscribe to my channel. It will help me a lot. Until the next video, stay sharp gamers.